Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Steve Everly's TV Classics. And I'm so thrilled to have you with us because it's a night of celebration. Why is it a night of celebration, you ask? Or if you didn't ask, it's because I've made another 365 days around the horn, and now I have hit the ripe old age of 67. We don't have a drum roll, we don't have an orchestral fanfare, but I've hit it, 67. In other words, I'm another year older, everybody, but that means I'm still in the mood, and I'm just doing everything I can to bring you some outstanding classics. And tonight I think we have some really, really good ones. We're going to start off with Lucy. I always find out that when we start with Lucy, everybody gets out to a good laugh. In the earlier episodes of her second show, The Lucy Show, were really the better ones, because you had the exchanges between her and Vivian Vance, and even though you didn't have Fred and you didn't have Ricky there, they still had one of the greatest comedy teams that there ever was. And this one is called Lucy and the Barbershop Quartet. Now, you can just tell from the title exactly how that is all going to flow, because in this one, Lucy is going to find out that Viv and her two friends are desperately scouting for a soprano to fill out a vacancy from a friend who has had to move across the country, and they're about to enter into a competition. And you can just about imagine that some of this is adapted from an I Love Lucy episode that went back to 1955, in which Lucy was going to be part of a barbershop quartet as her swan song. And it's really, this is a really funny episode of The Lucy Show. So I hope you enjoy it. And here we go. We're going to take you back to 1962 with this one, 59 years, for this edition of The Lucy Show. Now, The Lucy Show ran 6 years, and it could have continued on and on and on, except for one thing. Frankly, Lucy wanted to go ahead and get it into reruns, and it did have a run on the network on CBS for 3 years. But she wanted to go ahead and get it into reruns because there was so much money to be made from it. And then, because her two children, Desi Jr., actually Desi the fourth, but nobody ever called him that, Desi Jr. and little Lucy, they were at an age in which they wanted to try their hands as being actors on her show. So they reformatted it into Here's Lucy in 1968. And it was a show in which Lucy changed her name from Carmichael to Barker. And she had her, let me try that again, it's Carter. Now, the Lucy Show actually ended in 1968 after 6 years. The ratings were still top 10, dominating the time slot. There were so many shows that ended up in the litter bin on the other networks opposite Lucy. But the reason that she went on and changed the format in 1968 was twofold. One, because she really wanted to go ahead and get this show into reruns because there was so much money to be made from it. And CBS was willing to put it into daytime reruns, which it did for 3 years. But also, a big boom that was about to happen was that her two teenage children, Desi Jr., or actually it was Desi the fourth, but nobody ever called him that, and Lucy, they called her Little Lucy, but anyway, they wanted to be regulars on her show, and so she decided, let's change the format. And so her name changed from Lucy Carmichael to Lucy Carter, but she played the same role. Lucy was Lucy. But she was a widowed mother of two teenage kids. And Gail Gordon came along with it because that was one of her favorite sidekicks of all time. Gail Gordon he was known as Uncle Harry Carter, and he ran a unique employment agency. I never really understood how he made a lot of money from that profession. But, and the show relied a lot on guest stars. You had just tons of them who were popular with younger people as well as older people. There's a classic, Here's Lucy, in which Viv is coming out to visit with Lucy. She came and made, for nostalgia's sake, she'd make one guest appearance a season. So Viv was coming out. And what she wanted to do is to meet Lawrence Welk. And of course, that was a perfect cue to have Lawrence be a guest on the show. And it was one of the funnier episodes of Here's Lucy. I think that Here's Lucy was actually a better show as a whole than the Lucy show was in its last 3 years when they moved her away to California from Danville, Connecticut. And it just didn't seem to have quite the same vibe without Vivian on the show as a regular. But nonetheless, again, one of the classics of all time. And another one of the classics that for a time on Monday nights, at least for the first 2 years of the Lucy show, back to back, Lucy was at 8:30 on Monday nights. At 9 o'clock was the Danny Thomas show. Danny started his sitcom back in 1953 on ABC, and it ran there for 4 years. It was on a variety of time slots. But it was not until he moved to CBS that the show took off in 1957 in the old I Love Lucy time slot and just became a mega hit. And when you put Lucy at 8:30 and Danny at 9 o'clock together, they were almost invincible. And particularly with Andy Griffith at 9:30, which was the case for a couple of years as well. But the bottom line is we're going to give you one of the early editions of the Danny Thomas show. In the 4th season, they changed the title from Make Room for Daddy to the Danny Thomas show because that was after Gene Hagen opted to leave the series as his first wife, Margaret Williams. This is going to be one of the episodes with Margaret and the kids, but she opted to leave the show because she thought it was a rather thankless role, even though that she was an Emmy winner for it. But Gene Hagen was also one that just didn't get along that well with Danny Thomas. But I thought that she brought a lot to the table on this show. And so here we go. We're going to take you back to one from 1955. And the kids get involved with this. It is a classic. So here we go. We're going back 66 years to this edition of the Danny Thomas Show. And let me say hello to any of you out there who happen to be watching us live right now because we're testing this out to see if we can do the lead-ins online live, and I think it's working out quite well. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. The Danny Thomas Show was still a top 10 show when Danny voluntarily ended it in 1964 after 11 years. Many people wanted to know, why are you giving it up when it's still right at the top of the game? And a big part of it was that he had done so many episodes, and when you're doing that part for 11 years, and then Danny had become very, very involved in ownership of other TV series. He went into co-production deals with everyone from Sheldon Leonard to Walter Brennan, and there's just a huge list. Aaron Spelling. He became a tycoon as a co-owner of a number of shows that he financed. Of course, he was in co-ownership with Sheldon Leonard and Andy Griffith for the Andy Griffith Show when the pilot was done on Danny's show. But in 1964, he was just really tired of 11 seasons, and at that point in time, they were rapidly approaching 400 episodes of the Danny Thomas Show. And he felt like it was just time to move on. I can tell you CBS did not want to see it end because they had that invincible Monday night lineup of Lucy, Danny, and Andy Griffith. They didn't want to see it end, but it had to at some point. So in 1964, it did. Well, we're going to switch gears now to detective mystery. Now, some of the great detective mystery shows started in radio. And it was really a fascinating medium to listen to them. I'm a fan of old-time radio. And there's nothing like a mystery and a detective drama on radio where you use your imagination to try to figure out what the people look like and to really try to determine where they are, what the storyline's all about by filling in your own mind what everything is doing as it unfolds. Well, one of the radio dramas that started in the 1940s, actually in film, it didn't go to radio until 1952, but in film, Lloyd Nolan played this role originally in a series of 7 movies in the 40s. And then in the late 40s, believe it or not, Hugh Beaumont, Ward Cleaver, played this same role. It was a much lower budget series of movies because he was in what was called a poverty-stricken studio. They just didn't have much money. But Hugh rose above the lack of money for sets, and he was really a very strong one in this role. And then it went to radio in the 50s. Well, finally, in 1961-62, NBC opted to try this as a series. And there was a distinctively handsome actor named Richard Denning who had appeared as the male half of the couple in the comedy mystery Mr. and Mrs. North that was done back in the late 1950s on CBS. Well, NBC thought he brought a lot to the table, and frankly, he did. He was a fine actor. And so tonight we're going to show you an episode of Michael Shayne. I've been watching some of these on a couple of streaming services, and I got to tell you, I really think it was a much better show than the ratings indicated. So tonight we're going to show you some of the other regulars of Herb Rudley, who was an actor who went on to play for a couple of years in The Mothers-in-Law on NBC, as well as Jerry Paris. And I'll tell you more about him after you see it. But let's all sit back and enjoy here on my 67th birthday of this edition of Michael Shayne. Well, that was 60 years ago, and I must tell you, I really think Michael Shayne as a television show and the way it was produced was a lot better than the ratings indicated. I thought they had some reasonably decent sets. I think Richard Denning was a fine actor. One of the problems is they scheduled it on Friday nights at 10 o'clock. It would have been 9 in the Central Time Zone, but Friday nights at 10 o'clock. That was still a very rough place to be able to draw a rating. He was going up against The Detectives that starred Robert Taylor, that had been a very strong show for ABC and was going to move to NBC the next year and expand to 1 hour. And it also went up against The Twilight Zone. And still, the ratings were not that bad, but NBC decided that because of the expense, and this was one of the more expensive shows that they did because there was so much location shooting, they decided that for the expense of this show, it just was not worth continuing because of the ratings that it had. So the bottom line, Michael Shayne expired in 1962, and you keep hearing that there may be an attempt to recreate the show again at some point in time. I don't know. I don't think I want to see the way it would happen in modern times, because I think that, I'm sorry, I don't care for the way shows are redone today. I just think they take too many liberties with it. But that's the way it was. But I hope you enjoyed Michael Shayne. Now we're going to move back into an area that I think you really will enjoy, and we'll do that right after this. Hold on. Oh, I didn't see you. Well, we go from Michael Shayne into another one that was an NBC favorite. And we brought you a number of these recently, and I never get tired of them because the music is every bit as good as the comedy, because you had an excellent chorus, a terrific orchestra, and of course the man himself, Tennessee Ernie Ford. And tonight we're going to take you back to one that originated 60 years ago in 1961. And this is when Ernie's guest star was Andy Devine, who many of you may remember. He was an old-time Western star But also, he did a Saturday morning show on NBC called Andy's Gang back in the 50s. But he was best known as Jingles, the sidekick of Wild Bill Hickok. He had that gravelly voice. He said, "Hey, Wild Bill, wait for me." And you'll hear it again right here as we take you back 60 years to this edition of the Tennessee Ernie Ford Show. Okay. 3, 2, 1. We've had several shows tonight that we have asked the question, why did it end when it did about a specific show? And many people wanted to know, why did Ernie end his show in 1961? Because the ratings were still very respectable. Now, he had dropped out of the top 15 because ABC had thrown the Untouchables up against him. And it was a lot tougher competition. But the fact is, Ernie could have been renewed for another 2 years, which is what NBC really wanted. But the honest truth is that Ernie, who started in daytime television on NBC back in 1953, he had been doing either 5-day-a-week television or weekly nighttime television for 8 years. And even if you get the summers off, as he did, because it was always going to be a summer replacement show, even if you had the summers off, it was really a grind. And Ernie felt like he had just about done everything he could do. He had made a ton of money because he was a co-owner of his own show. And so he decided to end it in 1961 and frankly take a year off because he was building a house in San Francisco. He wanted to raise his kids as they were growing up away from the huge, crowded, and at times wacky area of Hollywood. So it was in suburban San Francisco that he built a home. And then in 1962, it was not long after the nighttime show went off the air, Ernie was coaxed back to daytime television. And for 3 years, he did another daytime series that had music and light conversation and guest stars, but it was really newer talent that he had with him. Jim Lang of The Dating Game was his announcer. And so he did that on ABC, and he also was given a production deal that gave him an interest in a few series. None of the ones that he co-produced ever really became significant hits, but it was financially very good for him because they let him tape the show in San Francisco. And because of that, it was a win-win situation for everybody. ABC got 3.5 good years out of him for daytime TV. And that was pretty much the end, except Ernie came back and he did a lot of specials. He was a guest star in a number of variety shows. He hosted the first 2 years of the Country Music Association Awards on television. So you're talking about one of the fine performers that TV has ever had, and one of our own native sons from Tennessee. Tonight we wind up with one that every few weeks we try to bring you another one because it's always a great test to see if you know when the price is right, as Don Pardo would say. And tonight we have some of the craziest gifts that you could ever imagine. This episode is from June 1963, not long before the show moved to ABC from NBC. But regardless, the nighttime version of The Price is Right had just absolutely unusual bonuses and some of the great, absolutely great competition between the bidders on stage. And for those of you who are only used to the Bob Barker and Drew Carey version, you can't imagine and have a picture of how big The Price is Right was, particularly the nighttime version. So we're going to take you right back to that. Here we go. 58 years ago, Bill Cullen and The Price is Right. So let me answer this question for The Price is Right. Many people have asked the question, why did The Price is Right? Because it was still a big success in daytime TV. Why did The Price is Right move from NBC to ABC? Well, after 6 years on the air with a nighttime version that had been at one point in time the #2 evening show on the entire NBC television network and had for 3 years been a top 10 show in nighttime, NBC got a little greedy and moved it into some time slots that were just too hazardous, and the ratings began to fall. And so in 1963, NBC decided to cancel the nighttime version, which was very lucrative for Mark Goodson and Bill Todd. Now, the daytime version certainly was too. But when they lost the nighttime version, ABC made them an offer because their contract was up. ABC made them an offer. You bring it over to us, and we will continue with a nighttime version of The Price is Right, which they did. Unfortunately, when the show moved to ABC, there were a couple of things that just were not as good. Is that the show had been in color, except for the first year in daytime, the show had been in color. It was one of the earliest regular color shows on the NBC television network. Well, it went back to black and white because ABC did not have color facilities in New York or Hollywood at that point in time. So it went back to black and white. And then the other issue that came along was the fact that it was placed in time slots, just like NBC had done, that were just extremely difficult to compete. The first one went against the last half hour of the Virginian, and I got news for you. If people who got hooked into the first hour of the Virginian weren't going to turn away for The Price is Right in the last half hour. And then they moved it for the last half season to Friday nights at 9:30. Now, it wasn't as tough competition. They were going up against a show called That Was the Week That Was on NBC, as well as The Twilight Zone, which was in its final year on CBS. But unfortunately, the numbers just did not hold up. And believe it or not, all three of those shows, That Was the Week That Was, moved to Tuesday nights the next year, but it was canceled in 13 weeks. But in a matter of just a half season, all three of those shows on Friday nights at 9:30 were gone, and The Price is Right was one of them. But let me tell you that it was announced this week that CBS in mid-September is going to do a 2-hour special to celebrate in prime time the 50th anniversary of the CBS daytime version of The Price is Right that premiered on Labor Day in 1972 and started that long 35-year run for Bob Barker. And can you believe that Drew Carey has been almost 15 years as the host of that show? I don't want to get into that tonight, but CBS will do that. It'll be a lot of clips, a lot of highlights of the shows over the years, and I think you'll enjoy it. It'll be great nostalgia. Well, I hope we've had some great nostalgia tonight with Lucy and Danny, Michael Shane, as well as what we brought you in our final hour tonight, and Ernie Ford of The Price is Right. You can't go wrong with any of these. So I hope you'll be back with us again next week. Remember, for those of you watching in Jackson, Tennessee, tomorrow night will be the best of TV classics. And for those of you on Roku, stay tuned because we'll have another episode immediately following this one. Until then, this is Steve Everly saying, remember to keep watching the classics because that was when television was fun.